Hi, I'm Mindy Silva. Welcome to the WikiTree Challenge, where in 1 week, our team of volunteers work together to uncover as much as possible about the family history of a notable guest. For this challenge, our volunteer researchers tackled the family history of rock keyboardist and composer Oliver Wakeman. Are you ready to see what we found?
Yeah, very excited. Very excited to see what my ancestors were up to.
Best known for his time in the bands Yes and the Strawbs, Oliver also has success both as a solo artist and collaboratively with other musicians such as Steve Howe and Clive Nolan.
So I've got a box set that comes out in a couple of weeks' time, which is a collection of albums that I did with prog rock guitarist Steve Howe and Gordon Giltrap. And then there were a couple of other box sets I did over the last couple of years. Busy doing that. And then I've got another band project that we're hoping to get sorted by the end of the year. And I have a solo sort of Celtic rock record, which I'm putting together and hope to get out and play live at some point this year. My dad always used to say to me, there were never enough hours in the day. And I never knew what he meant until I got older.
We were curious whether we would find other musicians in the branches of his tree. To our surprise, after adding 944 new people, there was only one: Thomas Wakeman. To get there, we start with Oliver, to his father Richard Wakeman, to his father Cyril Wakeman, and to his father Frank Wakeman, and on up the Wakeman line to Charles, John Martin, and finally to Oliver's fourth great-grandparents, John Wakeman and his wife Anne Wood. John and Anne were married September 13, 1818 in St. George Hanover Square, Middlesex, England. John, the first of their 6 children, and Oliver's third great-grandfather, was born on March 3, 1819 in Chiswick. Thomas, their 5th child and our musician, was born on December 21, 1830 in Hammersmith.
He was born in Hammersmith as well. That's Middlesex. That's where my dad grew up, was Middlesex.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, my dad grew up in Harrow. My nan and granddad, Mildred and Cyril, when I was a little lad, they lived in Middlesex in Harrow, and Dad went to school in Harrow. So that's interesting that 100 and something years before that, they were in the same place.
On January 16, 1831, Thomas was baptized at St. Nicholas Church, the parish church in Chiswick. The oldest part of Chiswick developed as a village around the church as far back as 1181. The tower was built out in the early 15th century. In early 1853, Thomas married Ellen Shepherd in Brentford, Middlesex, England. Together, they would have 7 children. Now, Thomas started working out, as many did, in adulthood. He was a general laborer, but by the time the 1861 census was taken, he was working as a musician. And it's interesting to note on here that Ellen, his wife, was listed as wife of musician. Usually they either left nothing or they put homekeeper or, something like that, but they put wife of musician for her occupation.
Wow.
By 1871, Thomas's occupation was listed as a traveler for a bookseller. This was an occupation that became more and more popular in the 19th century. Unlike peddlers who went around selling goods from their carts, travelers would generally sell exclusively to the shops. Previously, shop owners would go to the warehouses to pick up the supplies. So with the rise of the commercial traveler, there was a decline in the trade of the warehouseman. Travelers earned £100 to £200 as a base salary, but most of their income came from commissions. These were based on a sliding scale that really motivated travelers to get big orders. Thomas was also likely quite personable, as salesmen tend to be. Travel took so long that these men could be away from home for 10 months out of the year. I can't imagine it's hard enough nowadays to have people working away from home.
Musicians, for one.
Yes. Musician and traveler at heart. He wanted to move around, but he would just go out and do these things.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've always thought there's a part of our history that must make us want to travel around, because I get unbelievably itchy feet. I can't bear to be in the same place for very long. Wherever I've lived, always been like that. Where next?
See, now you know what line it came off of.
Yeah, interesting.
Sadly, by 1881, we learn that Thomas's wife, Ellen, was now a widow. We don't know exactly what year he died, but it would have been between 1877, when his youngest child was born, and 1881. Just, was right under that 50-year-old mark. Ellen was forced to take up work as a laundress, and then Annie and George both worked to help support the family as well.
Wow. So that bit there where it says Ellen Wakeman, head, that is because, is that what determines that she was a widow? Because she's now the head of the family?
And for marital status, they did list her as widowed.
Okay.
So it's not like, he left her or anything. She was definitely widowed. It seems fitting that since Oliver and his father are both prominent musicians, the one other musician we found in their family would also be in the Wakeman line.
I know a little bit about my history, which has been passed down. As a Wakeman used to be somebody that was the legal or a solicitor or something to do with areas in the UK, and they were in charge of waking up or keeping hold of all the legal stuff. That would explain why there are quite a few Wakemans around.
That might be more of an occupational thing than a familial descent.
Yeah.
Even though Oliver knew some of his family history before we started, we were excited to introduce him to an ancestor he was not familiar with. His second great-grandfather, William Waller. While Oliver and Thomas found their passion in music, this ancestor also found his passion, only his was bicycling. To get there, we started with Oliver, then to his father Richard Wakeman, then to his father Cyril Wakeman, to his mother Esther Agnes Waller, and to her father William. William Henry Waller was born in 1862 in Rogate, Sussex, England, the oldest son of James Waller and Emma Boniface. James and Emma had children together and from previous marriages, giving William 15 siblings in total. Elizabeth Jane Ings was born in 1864 in Gosport, Hampshire, England, the third of 8 children of Jabez Ings and Elizabeth Moore. William and Elizabeth married in mid to late summer of 1884, and their marriage was registered in Alverstoke, Hampshire, England. Both were accustomed to being in large families, so it's perhaps not surprising that they went on to have 10 children over the next 25 years. Though census records would show William worked as a bricklayer, builder, and building worker, it was apparent that one of his true passions was cycling. This would prove to be both a blessing and a curse in his life.
This was the first discovery of the magic of the bicycle.
It's important to keep in mind that bicycles in the late 1800s were not like the bicycles we know today. Their wheels were made out of wood, and they were often called bone shakers due to the irritating vibrations produced by the wheel impact with the ground. The average cost of a bicycle at that time was $75. The 1890s were called the golden age of the bicycle, and it was during this time that bicycle racing was now being taken very seriously. Innovations allowed riders to gain speed with a lower chance of peril.
Hence, speed with safety, through the magic of the first bicycle sprocket and chain gear.
Cycling clubs in the UK started forming in the 1870s, with the earliest possible being the Pickwick Cycling Club. By 1894, William was captain of his local group, the Gosport Star Cycling Club. In September of that year, William would take up the challenge of competing in an epic race. From the Hampshire Telegraph and Naval Chronicle.
It was a great pity that the 100-mile bicycle race, held under the auspices of the Gosport Star Cycling Club at Gosport Park on Saturday afternoon, was not attended by fine weather. The spectators who did brave the wet, however, were not so few as might have been expected, which plainly shows that the athletic clubs of the town need only a little encouragement from the local board, and they will find ample support from the public. The race was between Mr. William Waller, the captain of the club, and Private F.W. Hankin, RMLI, a member. A start was effected at noon, at which time the track was heavy with the wet and the sky dark with threatening clouds. The pacing was taken up by Cobbett, who had Voller in hand, and Anning, a comrade of Hankin. Things kept pretty even for the first few miles, but between the 5th and 6th, Voller got a lap ahead. The lead he gradually increased, and at the end of the first hour the mileage was 17 to Voller and 16 and a lap to Hankin. Penelham and Horseman succeeded the first two pacemakers, and Voller continued to draw away from Hankin, who stopped and had a rub-down after going 31 miles. Voller had covered 32 miles by 2 o'clock. At 2:45, Voller started away. Hankin did not respond to the challenge until Penelham drew him along. Voller, however, soon put on another lap. Hankin then made a spurt, paced by Penelham and Anning. Shortly before 3, Clark of Portsmouth took up pacing for Voller and piled the rate on. At 3 o'clock, paced by Cobbett and Anning, Hankin tried to get up, but Voller, paced by Clark, simply plowed on and gained another mile in a short time. Hankin got down again in his 39th mile and lost 2 laps. He complained of cramps in his arms, but remounted. He finally retired, however, at his 46th mile. Voller kept on to the finish, his time for the 100 miles being 6 hours and 13 minutes. This was a good performance considering the conditions, for Voller was past 30 years of age. The wind was vile, and the rain made the going heavy.
Your ancestor completed the race. William actually completed it. He went the 100 miles on the bikes. One of the things that they kept saying is they just thought his performance was so incredible, considering he was past 30 years of age. Okay, so 30 is such a young person nowadays, but back then they're like, wow, he was like 30 years old and he still did that. He was an old man and he finished that race. Race certainly had to have been a high point in William's life. But by May of 1899, he reached a definite low. We're not sure what led him to commit a series of crimes. Perhaps it was the strain of caring for his growing family, for he and Elizabeth had 6 children under the age of 14 to provide for by this time. Whatever the reason, William found himself in some serious legal trouble. Despite being judged to be of good character during his 14-year residency in Gosport, he was accused both of stealing bicycles and passing bad checks. In December 1898, William leased some bicycles from a local merchant, saying that he would like to provide them for 2 of his guests. He then took the bicycles to 2 different pawnbrokers and used them to receive cash advances. In one instance, he forged a receipt to convince the pawnbroker that he owned one of the bicycles he was pawning. Early the following year, William was found to have written several checks, which a local butcher, Mr. Arthur Hilliard, had cashed for him. Unfortunately, William did not have the funds in his account to cover the amount of the checks, and Mr. Hilliard was swindled out of his money. Mr. Hilliard later brought charges against William for the loss he suffered. William was committed to trial, denied bail, and sent to Kingston Gaol. William was tried for these charges on the 27th of June, 1899. He was taking maybe enough to feed his family that night. It was just a really small amount. It makes you feel for him.
Yeah. And he got 6 months hard labor.
Yeah, and he was actually one of the luckier ones. He wound up confessing to all of the crimes, which helped. He confessed, he showed remorse, and they gave him 6 months of hard labor. One of the other things he was lucky about is that a lot of these prisoners were sentenced to transport during these times. And so they would take hundreds of them and put them on these ships. And once the ship got full, they would take them off to Australia or something and dump them. And then they would have to find their way back once they had served their term.
Oh, wow.
Thankfully, after these instances, William appears to have returned to the straight and narrow, as we did not find any more reports of crimes committed. One wonders if, after all the struggles this must have brought to him and his family, if William was ever able to find joy in bicycling again. It seems in most families we research that we find at least one incident involving a train. In Oliver's case, this was no exception, and we shared with him the tragic tale of his 4th great-grandfather, John Moore. To get to him, we again started with Oliver, to his father Richard, to his father Cyril, to his mother Esther Voller, to her mother Elizabeth Ings, to her mother Elizabeth Moore, and finally to her parents John and Elizabeth Moore. Now, John Moore was born in the fall of 1810 in Morden, Surrey, England, and was the son of Peter and Lydia Moore. He was baptized September 16th of that same year at St. Lawrence Church in Morden. On February 6, 1841, John married Elizabeth Martin in Alverstoke, Hampshire, England. Their marriage record states John was a bachelor and Elizabeth a spinster. She was about 21 when they wed. Both of their fathers were recorded as gardeners, and we had to wonder if this was how John and Elizabeth met. John was already working as a platelayer for the London and South Western Railway by the time they married. A platelayer was an employee who inspected and maintained the permanent way of the railway, usually under the charge of a foreman, or ganger as they were known. By 1851, John and Elizabeth were living in West Street, Fareham, Hampshire, and now had quite the family. 7 children under the age of 8, including newborn twins Agnes and Emily. 10 years later, John was still working for London and South Western Railway as a platelayer and had 3 more children for a total of 10. All in all, life seemed good for John, who was described by others as a remarkably steady, sober, and honest fellow. He was a member of the Odd Fellows Society. He'd worked 29 years for the railway. He even had 2 sons who followed in his footsteps and worked at the railway, George and Charles. Though George would go on to join the Royal Navy, Charles would continue with the railway to eventually become the railway station master. But then we come to June 6th, 1870. And after 29 years of employment by this railway company, tragedy befell John.
Yeah, on the Monday morning last, a sad and fatal accident occurred on the line of the London and South Western Railway just below Botley to a man named John Moore, who was unfortunately crushed to death whilst on duty. Crikey. It's awful.
And with such a large family, I can't even imagine.
No.
Monday, June 6, 1870. Started at Botley Station much like any other day. It was a comfortable summer morning with just a few clouds hanging about in the sky. Passengers dotted the platform, a few of them watching with casual interest as the ganger of the day gave instructions to his plating crew. A fruit train had arrived earlier, and the dirt alongside the tracks was filled with small baskets of strawberries, for about as far as the eye could see. A familiar scene at the tracks during fruit season. In a good year, there'd be 1 million baskets come through between May and September. Carts would arrive soon, and the strawberries would be decanted and hauled away, leaving empty baskets strewn hither and yon. The station manager stood at the window in his office on the upper floor of the main station building, as he did most mornings, to keep an eye on the comings and goings below. About 500 yards down the railway was a muscular figure making his way back towards the station. It was John Moore, a man familiar to everyone who worked there, as he'd been walking and working those tracks for nearly 30 years. The station manager glanced down at his pocket watch. 10:55 a.m. Time to go down and meet the cattle train from Portsmouth, he thought to himself as he turned from the window. Back on the track, John heard the loud, familiar rumble of a heavy goods train letting him know he needed to move. As he had many times before, John stepped over towards the up line to let the train pass. What happened next would rattle everyone nearby. Whether it was the intense noise of the goods train, or the sharp curve in the tracks, or a combination of the two, John did not hear or see the oncoming cattle train as he moved across until it was too late to get out of its way. He was met by the buffer of the engine and knocked some ways up the track. Immediate attention was given to the accident, but it was to no avail. Death had been instant.
John was interred at Trinity Churchyard the Thursday following his death. A large number of workmen on the line, as well as several from the Oddfellow Society, attended to show respect for their friend and brother. Incidentally, John Moore is the grandfather of Elizabeth Ings, the wife of the cyclist William Baller. She would have been about 6 years old, just a little girl, when he died.
Oh, that's really sad.
Normally what I say is, if they're not naughty or nice, they don't show up in the papers. But unfortunately, it also is true. And so it did make a number of newspaper articles. Otherwise, You're looking at the next census record going, where is he? There she is with the 10 kids.
One of our favorite features on WikiTree is our connection finder. Once you connect to our global tree, you can use this feature to see how you are connected to any of the other 25 million people our volunteer community has been able to connect. Think 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. These connections are typically by marriage rather than blood. Each time you see the color change in the connection path, that means there was a marriage. For fun, we checked a few connections for Oliver. Since much of his music relates to Sherlock Holmes, we were curious to see how he connected to author Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. They are 27 degrees apart and connect through Oliver's father's side of the family. Incidentally, in their connection path there are 2 other notables, Irene Fenwick and Mae Murray, both actresses who rose to fame during the silent film era. Oliver's father, Rick Wakeman, is also a well-known musician. One of his more notable albums is The 6 Wives of Henry VIII. With that in mind, and considering their family's solid British roots, we ran the finder to see Oliver's connection to the king. They are 25 degrees apart, and while it may have been Oliver's father's album, this connection to Henry VIII is through Oliver's mother's side of the family. While researching, we discovered a lot of Churchills, so of course we wanted to see how he was connected to the most notable Churchill, Winston. Winston once said, "The farther backward you can look, the farther forward you are likely to see," which seems fitting for our work here. As the connection finder shows, Oliver and Sir Winston are a mere 21 degrees apart.
So I'm 21 degrees away from Churchill.
Yes.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's a great thing to know. That's a dinner party story, isn't it?
Oh, you mean you're not related to Winston
You're not
Churchill?
related? Oh, crikey, I thought we all were. Well, there we go. That's going to be lovely.
So do you feel like you know more about your family now?
I do, actually. It's interesting to see, so because some of the names, when I'd sort of, as we spoke before, I'd done some of the research myself, but nowhere near as much as this. But it's really nice to see some of the things where I'd thought possibly that could be one, to see it confirmed through and see some of the different surnames.
Appreciate you giving us the time and letting us do the interviews and letting us look through your branches. And I just really hope that you feel closer to your ancestors now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to keep reading and keep reading. It was interesting to see so many articles as well. Thank you ever so much for doing that. It's been fantastic.